We had a meeting and they offered me the job. I think at the time I might have been the youngest non-league manager in the country. And they say that England has the greatest pyramid in the world when it comes to football. Clubs have gone big for a year, 2 years, got promotions sometimes, look like they're on the up, and then just out of nowhere the money's just been pulled. Some people might think that that's terrible. Some people might say they gave that club 2 years of a great journey. There's some clubs that are struggling to even exist. It's a really wild, wild west out there. Look, I just need some clips. Just send me some clips. A lot of them don't realise how hard football is, especially if they've just played youth football. You're just going to be a number on a team sheet. You have to play. If you're not playing, you're not developing, you're not progressing. You're there to win. You're not there to make friends. They want to see you when you're 1-0 down. They want to see you after you've made a mistake. If you drop 5%, 10%, 15%, you're done.
So, Rak, welcome to episode 2 of the Playerbacker podcast. You are our resident gaffer, shall we say. You've obviously managed a number of non-league football teams in your young coaching career to date. And I think what you're going to bring to the podcast is that valuable insight from the manager's perspective in terms of what is required for young players to make it in the game. Obviously, I'm coming at it from more of the recruitment side and the sort of talent identification side as an agent. But you are very much the manager and within the dressing room, shall we say. So for this episode, really, I wanted to get more of an insight into your mindset as a manager and advice you can give young players based around the system, shall we say, in the pyramid. So what was the first management job at a senior level that you got?
Yeah, interesting. Obviously, to build up to that, I did the youth football from the age of 14 all the way through to the point where I was running the under-18s at a non-league club. I actually ran the women's senior team as well as manager when I was about 19, which didn't clash with my own football because their match day was a Sunday. I'd play on a Saturday and a Tuesday. They'd train on a different day. So that all led through to the point where at 23 years old, I had an injury that kept me out for quite a long time. Fed up quite a bit from it in terms of my football side. The injury was just frustrating. I loved the management side, and Kentish Town Football Club at Step 5 was struggling at the time. I knew a lot of players. I knew the people involved. I'm from Camden myself, and Frank and Kevin and Kathy just approached me. We had a meeting and they offered me the job, and that was my first senior management job.
So what age were you then?
23, and I think at the time I might have been the youngest non-league manager in the country.
And I'm presuming a lot of the players that you took on were actually older than you.
Yes, a lot of them were older. Of course, there were some that were coming out of the under-18s that I'd coached, very good players. But yeah, some of them were in their 30s.
Was that an issue for you? Was that a challenge? How did you find that?
Felt quite natural for me. I had good relationships with players, and we had a really positive environment. The boys enjoyed it. I mean, I'm sure people that play football will know there's different styles of coaching and management, and some players might find some better than others. There's a way to be in charge and forceful without shouting and belittling or being overly aggressive too often. So I think the players respected what we were doing and they enjoyed the environment. And if that's the case, then the age doesn't become such an issue.
And you talked earlier about it, Step 5, the level being Step 5. I think what might be beneficial for people that might be watching this, that are trying to learn more about the industry. I think some players, they all they know is the game and playing the game, but if you're going to make it as a professional in this game and earn money from it, you kind of need to understand the routes to getting there, and the levels and what's involved. So when you say Step 5, could you give us a brief sort of outline of how the pyramid system works in England?
Yeah, I mean, they say that England has the greatest pyramid in the world when it comes to football. And that's because of the system that we're speaking about now. You've got the Premier League, the Championship, League 1, League 2. That's your professional game. And then you've got underneath that the Conference Prem, which is or always has been
National League.
National
Now,
League,
isn't it?
yeah, which has always been considered not professional. But with the way football's going, actually, a lot of the teams, if not all, in the National League are now professional, but it's
On
considered
contracts.
on contracts full time. A lot of them, but that's considered step one of the non-league pyramid.
Right. So step one is the first step underneath professional, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's two ways that you can call it the step one, or some people will go Premiership, Championship, League One, League Two, National League, which is the fifth level down, but it's step one of the non-league pyramid. So underneath that, you've got step two, which is the National League North and National League South. So after you get to the non-league pyramid and section, it's all regionalised. So Premiership down to League Two, it's national leagues, and even the National Premier Step One is a national league. You can go up and down the country, lots of travel, but obviously finances and things like that. Underneath that, obviously you can't get players that work a day job and are on no money or very small money travelling 4 or 5 hours across the country for a game. It's just not financially feasible or sensible. So that's when it starts becoming regionalised. So step two, you've got North and South, and then you go to step three, which is now 3 divisions, again regionalised, or 4 divisions now. It's all it has actually been reshuffled recently. The FA are trying to make it perfect, which is actually quite good. So you've got 1 National League, 2 below that, 4 below that, 8 below that. So it works out that you have 2 leagues feeding into the 1 league.
Right, okay.
So you have step 1, step 2, North and South. Step 3, you've then got your Isthmian Prems, your Southern Prems. Then you've got your step 4, which feeds into that. And then below that, step 5, where there's probably 15 or 16 regional leagues across the country, such as the Combined Counties North, Combined Counties South, Spartan Prem, Essex Senior League, Unibond League, and then a lot up north that I probably wouldn't even be able to tell you about.
A lot of different levels, a lot of different leagues on a regional perspective. If we talk about money, so people can get an idea of what we're dealing with here. I mean, from my knowledge as an agent, like you say, obviously League Two and up, they're on contracts, they're on professional contracts. From what I know, League Two, they're getting a couple of grand a week on average, and then League One it starts to get a bit more towards sort of like 5-6 grand a week, and then Championship is pretty decent at the moment, obviously. And they can earn anything up to sort of like 10-20 grand a week, and obviously Premier League, as we know, it's in the hundreds of thousands a week. But interestingly for me, National League, like you said, pretty much all the National League teams from what I know are full time, and these guys are on a full time salary. They're pulling like a grand, maybe a couple a week, even at National League. So there's certainly money in the game, but when would you say it kind of drops off and it becomes more of an expenses situation?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because within a league you have a vast range of finances available to different clubs. And you've even got the situation where some players, especially older players, that are no longer really aiming to play the highest level they can, will choose to play at the lower level because it's part-time. So they'll do a Tuesday and Thursday night, play a Saturday, rather than full-time. And sometimes they'll actually get paid the same or more for that. So you could get better players playing in, let's say, National League South sometimes, when they could be playing in the National Prem. So that's a very interesting nuance to it, and I suppose it's the young players that really would always want to take that professional opportunity to see if they can progress their career more, rather than worry about playing part-time, where they can then earn the same money plus have a day job and then provide for their family, which obviously an older player would need to consider. But below that, money drops off massively. At step 5, which we were talking about earlier, you'll get some or quite a few players playing for free, playing for expenses, £20 a week. But you'll still get certain players at that level, especially at certain clubs, where there's minimum reports of £300-400 a week, rumoured to be more for certain rare instances. Step 4, one above that, you'd expect everyone really to be on minimum expenses, and a lot of players average will be £50 to £80. And then the better players at each club or at the higher paying clubs, you're talking about 150s, 200s, and then obviously the top players getting paid. Again, if you're saying the league below, there's certain players on 400, 500 even at the top range. At step 4, you're going to be certain players on a little bit more than that even.
And that's the interesting thing about football. I mean, obviously money talks in football, and every sort of division, every sort of level's got its own market, so to speak. You kind of know what is about average for the pay, but then obviously within that specific market, within that specific division, obviously if you want to go out and get one of the better players, even if you want to get a player like you say that potentially could be playing in the league above, but it might be that there's a team that's more local to them, so it just makes more sense for them from a travel and work perspective, then you might need to push the boat out a little bit and test the owner's purse strings and break the bank, shall we say.
We know that even at step 6, which is one below step 5 that we were talking about, we know that there's been players on around 300 there for sure. Players playing at step 6 because they're going to earn more than at step 5. So, again, there'll be clubs within leagues where there'll be vast difference, and there'll be clubs in leagues below that have bigger budgets than leagues above. Sometimes that means they can sign players that other clubs want. Sometimes the players are very focused on their development and they're not money orientated, or they're not focusing purely on the money. So yeah, it works like that all the way through. Even step 7, there's players getting paid well, and step 7, historically, most players wouldn't get paid. But in the last 2 years, there's been clubs paying decent money, and a lot more clubs even paying expenses. And some good players going to step 7 for that reason. So it's definitely more money in football, even non-league, now than there was. And there is definitely situations where players are playing lower because they're getting paid more.
And I guess it all comes down to the ambition of the people in charge of the clubs, right? And, it's got the effect on the other side of the coin, which is where you've got clubs that kind of just are existing. There is no budget, and managers and coaches like yourself are having to work wonders to actually get groups of lads in that are going to do a job.
I mean, in fairness, you've got the situation where a lot of clubs get these huge budgets, but they're not sustainable. So in fairness, there's very many examples of that where clubs have gone big for a year, 2 years, got promotions sometimes, look like they're on the up, and then just out of nowhere, the money's just been pulled. There's nothing left. The club's in disrepair. Often relegation follows, and they end up worse place than they started. Some people might think that that's terrible. Some people might say they gave that club 2 years of a great journey. Depends if the club, I suppose, ends up literally bankrupt or not, and in existence or not. So we've got to be fair with that. But certainly there's clubs that do things well. They build their clubs, they invest. There's a lot of manpower, a lot of people working hard behind the scenes. That's that community spirit and involvement. And yeah, there's some clubs that are struggling to even exist, and there's nothing there. And yeah, I mean, it's a really wild west out there.
And if you were going to give advice to young players who, if we were going to sort of paint a picture of money is not, for example, they might live at home, so money is not their main priority, and their main priority is to actually try and climb the ladder and try and get to that stage where they might be full-time, they might get offered a contract. What advice would you give a young player in terms of, clubs they might try to start at?
There's a lot of advice. Players make mistakes often when they're young and they've got the dreams and they want to do really well. They have to focus on their football. That's the first thing, and that means over finance and over the kudos of playing at a certain level or at a certain club. So example is a player goes to a club for money, sits on the bench, or it's a bad environment, they're not developing, but they've made that decision with bad advice, focused on the money, that's why they made it, and that can hurt them. And if they go somewhere for kudos, a club that's maybe higher up, or the club that's like got a reputation, but they don't play, again, you have to play. If you're not playing, you're not developing, you're not progressing. Plenty of examples from my own time and people that I know. Players go for money. Sometimes they might go and earn, not a lot, 50, 60, 80 quid, 100 quid a week, where maybe they weren't getting that at the club they were at. But they don't play enough football because the environment's tougher. That club they've gone to's got the money to invest in a lot of players, experienced players. Maybe the environment doesn't get the best out of them. They end up playing on the bench, not getting a lot of game time, not developing. And in a couple of years, you find those players have come back down the pyramid or even dropped out of the game. Now, if you could do a parallel life and have the same player make a separate decision and see the journey, sometimes sacrificing that finance in the short term, but gaining that development means maybe in 2-3 years, rather than not playing football at all or having found yourself back down where you started, they might actually have kicked on to the point where they're earning 5, 6, 7 times that. So you've got to think long term. You can't make decisions based on immediate money and things like that. If you're really serious about progressing, you've got to look at, is the environment right? Am I going to play enough football? Have I got good people advising me? Those are really the key things. Sometimes you might be somewhere where there's no money and it might be a bad environment and you might need to get out. That's fine. That can happen. And you might be somewhere with really good finance and it might be a great environment. But it could be the other way around as well. So it's important that the players get good advice and think long term and think about development if they're serious about progressing in football, because it's hard in football, and if you're not playing, then you're going backwards.
I guess it's not difficult to figure out how you're going to get to the top. You just got to constantly outplay the level that you're playing at. But if the only way you're going to do that is by putting in those performances, and obviously you're putting those performances in. Clubs at higher level are going to have a look, and then next thing you know, you're moving up a level again.
I've spoke to so many different managers, coaches. Me and you have experienced it ourselves. Players sitting on the bench at step 3. Step 3 is a far stronger, better level than step 5. And for sure, if you're playing first team football at step 3 at a young age, that's a good thing. But if you're sitting on the bench at step 3, let's say over a 20-30 game period, you're coming off the bench, you're getting a little start in a cup that doesn't really matter that much. No one's watching you. No one really thinks or is going to be thinking, let's look at this player. This player's doing. You're just going to be a number on a team sheet. Now, if you're 1 or 2 levels below, but you're starting every game, performing really well, maybe if you're an attacker, you're getting those goals and assists, there's going to be a real buzz, and we've seen it, a real buzz about you, because you're playing football and you're showing what you can do. And off the back of that, we've seen players get moves way beyond step 3 based on what they've done at step 5 or step 6 even. So again, you're not going to get any interest, you're not going to develop your football, you're not going to get that experience, you're not going to do yourself any favours if you're a seriously good young player that wants to do well and you're going to go and sit on the bench somewhere. You've got to go somewhere where you're going to get enough game time, and the manager and the coaches and the club's going to look after you and have your interests as well.
Yeah, and I think going back to what you said earlier, I completely agree about this kudos thing. Like, we've seen players that could have been playing at step 5, step 6, but they've decided to go and sit on the bench at a step 4 club and maybe get a tracksuit, and it makes them feel a bit more, I don't know, big time in their head. They might be earning a bit more money, but at the end of the day, you're making no impact in the game. No one knows you. No one's seeing you on the team sheet. No one's hearing about the reports of you doing this and that. You're literally going backwards. And one thing I wanted to ask you, out of interest, is, and especially this is sort of hopefully useful for young players. They generally say in football that obviously the higher level you go, obviously the technical side of the game massively improves, right? And the speed of the game. But from what I hear, and you would know better than me, in the lower leagues, the non-leagues, it's a lot about the athletic side of the game and the strength side, shall we say. So even if you are a technical player, if you're going to play and mix it at sort of step 3, step 4, you're going to get a lot of exposure to that physical side, aren't you? As opposed to potentially playing in an under 23s, at a big club, you're not necessarily going to be exposed to the rough side of senior football. So some of these lads that are 18, 19 that are playing week in, week out in step 5, step 4, it's massive, isn't it? You've seen them getting picked up now by big clubs.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them don't realise how hard football is, especially if they've just played youth football. They don't realise, you can't disrespect the level that you play at. If you drop to level or step 4, step 5, regardless of how much better you may feel you are, the potential you've got, and even if you are a player that's got the potential to be, a lot higher, you can't disrespect the level because football is hard, and you're not going to go in there and have a field day. You're going to get kicked. You're going to get pushed around. You're going to play on poor pitches. You're not always going to receive the ball. In some respects, it can be harder to play at those levels than at the better levels. But it's a development ground for you, and you can't think it's beneath you because probably you go there and you'll realise that it's a lot harder than you thought, and it'll bring you into more contention because you'll be more set and ready to make an impact higher up when you've had that experience. And you've got players like David Raya 10 years ago playing non-league football. You've got other players that have come through the system and developed, and from those games they've achieved the development they needed. Some clubs will be desperate to send a young goalie out somewhere in non-league football to get experience, and it's not easy to do it, to find them a place that they're going to get that experience. But the clubs will know that if they can send a keeper out to play 30 games at step 3, that's going to be an incredible development for them to one day push into the pro game. So you can't turn your nose at it. You've got to go in there with the right attitude and work hard and learn from the difficulties. And like you say, it's not just technical. You've got to learn the physical side, winning duels, dark arts. Being in an environment where you have to win. Where it's not like youth football. It's different. You're there to win. You're not there to make friends and we've got to develop this player. No, you need to win, and that's a part of senior football.
And one thing I wanted to ask as well, in terms of a young player that might be listening, advice from a manager. Obviously, managers, how they run their teams will differ from club to club. Some will be more in favour of promoting youth, giving youth players a chance. Some will be a lot more, like you say, focused on the short-term result, and they might go for more experience. I know from knowing yourself, you were not adverse to playing young players. Do you think young players, when they're sort of, looking for that club that they want to go and see if they can join a training session and get in through the door, do you think they should do more homework in terms of the actual team, in terms of the actual manager that's in charge? Because I feel like a lot of young players, they just kind of pick up the phone or go on social media that it's the nearest club to them, or it's the club that they can just turn up to. Should they be doing more research into actually what's going on at these clubs?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of players I've spoken to that have had horror stories, from different experiences at different levels on the non-league pyramid, seasons wasted. And that's where you get a lot of 18 to 22-year-olds drop out of the game because they go into the environment at non-league senior football, and actually it's not as fun anymore. It's not the same as when they played youth football. It's harder, and if they've picked the wrong environment, it can knock the love out of you, and then they're at the age where you're going to start working, might get a girlfriend, and then all of a sudden football's not the priority anymore, and everyone that's playing football, it's their priority. There's a lot of players working hard, so if you drop 5%, 10%, 15%, you're done. They have to think carefully about the environment they're going into, but at the same time, it's not easy because you've got managers working in different environments under different constraints at different levels. You're not necessarily going to be able to find a club that has the environment you need, that you're going to be able to get there, that they're going to be willing to take you in. So it's a bit of a catch-22, which is why you've got this channel, is to try and give some insight, because it is hard and it's not going to fall on your lap, and there are going to be difficulties.
100%, and I think, like you say, you are against the clock a bit, I suppose, as a young player. If you're not going down the traditional route of being at an academy, and either you might get released from an academy and you kind of go into a lower level academy. If you're one of these young players, which I think what this channel is trying to reach out to and advise the most, I would say, is this bracket of young players that are they may have been at an academy and fallen out of the system, but a lot of them may not have been, but they still have the potential to get into the game. It's more they're coming into the game. But I guess you are against the clock a bit because, like you say, you cannot afford to waste seasons where you're making the wrong decision and you're not playing football. The only way you're going to make it, the only way you're going to have one of these success stories, like if we take Richard Kone, the one who went from, where was it?
Athletic Newham.
Athletic Newham. I mean, what step were they?
Step 5.
Step 5 straight into League One, I want to say, Wycombe Wanderers.
Straight into Wycombe.
And he's banging in goals. I mean, the only way that anyone was going to know about that guy is if he's on the pitch regular and scoring goals.
Well, I mean, football, you got the statistics side, which of course is going to stand out when people search the internet, look at the league tables. When people want to talk about players, it's easy to throw statistics, of course. So if you're a forward and you're scoring goals, that's going to stand out, and goal scorers get paid the money because it's the hardest thing to do. That wins you games. So of course that's one part of it. But the other part of it is obviously performance, what you see of your eyes. And again, if a scout or someone's watching you, they're going to want to see what they see. And that's going to be a range of things. And one of the big things is going to be character, personality. When things get tough, you hear a lot of scouts say they want to see you when you're 1-0 down. They want to see you after you've made a mistake. So if you're playing and you make a mistake and you think it's the end of the world, well, actually, managers need to see players that have got that character to bounce back. So if you can make a mistake and bounce back, actually that can show more than you just having a plateau of 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10 game. If you're a centre midfielder, in the modern game, you've got to be winning duels. You've got to be getting those second balls. You've got to be able to hold off your opponent and make sure you retain possession, make good decisions. So it's the heart of the team, and mistakes can lead to opposition opportunities and goals, and if that happens, managers will not trust you and they will look for other players. And again, that's where an experienced player may not have the talent of a young player, but if he's not making those mistakes, the manager can trust him. If he's winning more duels, he's a bit more physical, the manager can trust him. So as a young player, you've got to match that, and then you've got to obviously show the other qualities you've got, and then you've got to push on, because you've got to remember, a lot of the players that still play non-league, play step 5, play step 4, they might be a bit older and they might not have the same enthusiasm for looking to the future, but a lot of them would have been top players when they were younger, coming through the system, the same as the young players that maybe are watching this now.
So the final question I wanted to ask to wrap this one up: you're giving advice to an 18-year-old. Where would they start? Let's say they're not at a club, and they haven't got a history, they haven't got a track record in sort of like non-league football.
From my experiences, and I think most managers will be the same, we get hundreds of inquiries from random people that want to play, and it's very time consuming, especially when you're considering this is people that have got full-time jobs. They've got to do almost everything themselves, compared to, let's say, someone working full-time in football that has an analyst, has a scout, has all these other things, and they're not working full-time anywhere else. So I always whittled it down really by asking, look, I just need some clips. Just send me some clips. I don't want to watch a whole match. I can't go and watch, all these matches of 100 people sending me things. I'll watch all these matches. It's impossible. Send me some clips. So we've got the VO these days. We've got all these devices. It's not too difficult to get some clips. So wherever you're playing, even if it's not at a top level, even if it's your Sunday team, whatever it is, just get some clips that show what you can do. Show something on the ball, show some defensive work, some dual wins, just a range of things that show. And if you're a good player and it shows that in that clip, then you're more likely to get an opportunity. That might be with the first team, it might be with the reserve team, but that's your foot in the door. And then if you are that good and you are with that potential, then once you're in the door and you're playing and you're showing what you can do, then of course you're going to be able to move through the ranks. If you came in and we decided to put you in the development team and you were outstanding and performing really well there, then you'd be sent through to the first team, maybe to train, maybe for a friendly, maybe for a cup game. And again, if you keep showing what you've got and you can mix it, then you're going to be in the first team. And then from there, of course, you're in the shop window from the get-go.
And just on that, I know Twitter, or X as it's now called, is pretty big in non-league game, and I know you get a lot of your information from that source. Would you advise these young players to have a social media presence where they can put this kind of footage up and you might come across it yourself.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you're putting good clips on Twitter and you're looking for a club, it's going to help because you've got the exposure. You've got quite a few accounts now that actually are set up to showcase players that are looking for clubs, and so these things will help. Obviously, you want to focus on your football. It's not going to make a big difference if you're performing. You're performing, but no one really wants to see a player that's lost a game and then puts on Twitter how oh, it's a shame we lost, but at least I scored. That kind of thing it can be a bit frustrating when you've got a team sport that everyone's trying to work their socks off to win a game of football. So you want to try and get the balance right, and you want to try and focus on your development and working hard. But for sure, modern day social media is part of it.